At the age of 19, at the height of the Cold War, Englishwoman Christine Keeler managed to have an affair with two high-ranking opponents at once, the British Minister of War and the Soviet attaché in London. Espionage, parties with leaders of countries and sects on the floor, with a Russian intelligence officer, made Keeler the anti-hero of modern British history. The name Christine Keeler is known to every Briton. Her love affairs were watched by John F. Kennedy, and the British royal court analyzed her every breath. "You can start World War II at any moment," her pimp, who moved in the highest circles of Great Britain, happily informed the girl. However, the last thing she wanted to do was participate in political underground games, and she craved only one thing: fun. The 1960s became an outlet for the whole world. The wounds inflicted by the Second World War finally began to heal, and the old generation was replaced by a new one. Young Englishmen did not want to live in a prim morality. They dreamed of freedom, the liberalization of everything, and, of course, an easy life. The Cultural Revolution then swept across Europe and America. The removal of shackles allowed the French New Wave to appear. The musical British Invasion in 1960, for example, the Beatles, then unknown to anyone, first declared themselves. The color strikes led by Martin Luther King. She ran away from home when she was 16. Her mother got married for the second time, and the girl's relationship with her stepfather did not work out. She had no special prospects in the tiny and dreary Uxbridge, but the capital beckoned with opportunities and freedom. Packing a travel bag while no one was at home, KRISTIN imagined herself proudly walking down the runway. However, the self-proclaimed fashion model in sleek London surprised no one. After hearing another refusal, she got a job as a saleswoman in a clothing store in Soho, and then as a waitress in a restaurant. That was the first time Keeler noticed that men were looking at her. Pretty, Keeler looked at all these beautiful ladies who visited the restaurant on Baker Street, at their dresses, jackets, jewelry, how they painted their lips, and deftly soaked their mouths with a napkin after coffee, and she wanted the same. But you can't go far with a waitress's salary, so the girl quit her job and became a topless dancer in a club. There she met Mandy Rice Davis, who sheltered the girl in her apartment. Yes, there were mostly Arabs and Americans among the guests, but at least they had money, and KRISTIN did not complain about her salary. From time to time, Englishmen came to the club, among whom was the star osteopath Stephen Ward. He helped Prince Philip stretch his bones, invited members of the royal family to dinner, befriended presidents, and hosted fashionable parties for the British elite. Stephen was one of the first to learn all the news, knew how to find an approach and win over prim millionaires, and also engaged in pimping. Just a nod, and a young nymph appeared next to an elderly rich man. Ward was always on the lookout for new faces, and therefore, when he went to the club once again, he immediately noticed pretty girlfriends, Keeler and Rice Davis. Yes, I was. But at that moment, the girl saw in front of her a charming man who simply invites her and her friend to his party, naturally for a reward. Keeler had little interest in politics, did not read newspapers, there was no talk of books at all, and had difficulty imagining who was sitting in Parliament now. She didn't know much about the Cold War between Britain and the USSR, about nuclear weapons at that moment, and only what was on everyone's lips. Therefore, when Ward introduced her to sheiks, Soviet attachés, and British ministers during the next party, she just smiled sweetly. Nothing else was needed. Christine Keeler first saw British Minister of War John Profumo in July 1961 at the Cleveland estate owned by Lord Bill Astor. On that hot summer evening, about 40 high-ranking guests gathered, including the President of Pakistan Ayub Khan, deputies from the Conservative Party, and the Soviet attaché in London, Yevgeny Ivanov. Lord Astor has allowed Mandy and me to swim in his marble pool. I didn't have a swimsuit with me, but I didn't get confused. I used a towel instead. It was so small that I could only cover one thing with it, either my chest or my hips. KRISTIN recalls that day. Of course, it is extremely inconvenient to swim in this form, and therefore the girl threw off the towel every now and then. In the dark, few people could see her nakedness, but very soon Lord Astor and John Profumo came down to the frolicking friends. They drank and, laughing, tried to pull the towel off me. I also drank champagne and had fun with this game. Sometimes she threw off the towel herself, sometimes she covered herself with it a little. Profumo often met various women at parties, both dazzlingly beautiful and those that are simpler. And yet young KRISTIN, giggling in the pool and deftly dodging his hands, managed to surprise. That same evening, the Minister of War and part-time member of the Conservative Party found an opportunity to escape from the protection of his wife, a film actress. He offered KRISTIN a tour of the estate. Needless to say, once behind closed doors, John began to stroke the girl below the back. Ward pushed me into the arms of a 46-year-old Profumo because he wanted me to find out the timing of the deployment of nuclear weapons in Germany. But that day his main goal was to put me in bed with Ivanov. Eugen was also among the guests, and we left Cleveland with him, Keeler will write in his memoirs. The Cold War required special measures, and therefore the big bear-like captain entered the highest British circles and actively established social ties, sometimes even too active. John Profumo could not enjoy the company of Christine Keeler that night because his wife was dragging behind him like a silent burden. Valerie Hobson, this sad-eyed movie star who traded her career for a happy marriage, was well aware of her husband's adventures. But she was a representative of the old generation, the one that marries once and for all and does not tolerate litter from the hut. Later, she will be one of the few who will side with John Profumo after accusations of anti-government activities and espionage. Be that as it may, that evening at Lord Astor's estate, the Minister of War did not manage to literally get close to the 19-year-old beauty. Yevgeny Ivanov hit on her. I won't say that I was crazy about this big Russian bear. Evgeny tirelessly boasted about his country. He clearly had no sense of humor. He took everything too seriously. We got to London, and I was surprised when he started asking to visit me, but I did not refuse. Then Evgeny took a bottle out of the trunk and said, "In Russia we drink vodka." At first he was not very excited, but then I felt the desire awaken in him. He knocked me to the floor. Eugen wanted good old-fashioned sex without any tricks. He got it, and he was quite on the level. However, she did not quite understand how this could help the UK. Her teacher in this matter was the ubiquitous Ward. When KRISTIN finally returned home the morning after the party, the first thing she had to do was answer Stephen's interrogation. The star osteopath was eager to find out how her rendezvous with the bear ended, and whether it was possible to count on a new source of classified information. He was happy as a little boy when he found out that I had slept with Eugene, and he kept saying, "Now you can start World War II at any moment." Then he began to ask about the smallest details. How did Eugene hug me? Did you take off your bra or underpants first? Was he gentle or rude? It was only a year and a half later that Keeler found out that her patron had immediately informed the British counterintelligence about everything that had happened at Lord Astor's party. About games in the pool, about the excursion of Profumo, about sex with Ivanov. Even the then Prime Minister Macmillan did not know all the details, and MI5 had already started tracking every step of the modern Mata Hari. John Profumo, it seems, was dissatisfied with how the evening went. He was eager to continue dating. The Secretary of War found out the home address of Christine Keeler. She moved in with Stephen Ward and showed up at the door the next day. A luxurious limousine, a spick and span suit, and a charming smile. Everything is with him. The girl who spent the whole night in the arms of a Soviet spy gladly accepted the invitation of the British minister and went to his house. There's no need to guess how this meeting ended. What Stephen Ward managed to teach the girl was silence. Yes, she spent time in the company of people directly related to the problem of nuclear weapons, but at the same time she kept her mouth shut. In the early 1960s, Khrushchev and Kennedy were in a life-and-death race, and Britain could only keep a sharp eye on the situation to prevent a global catastrophe. The information Keeler could get was priceless, but she didn't really understand it at the time. But I have learned something else. It is necessary to keep silent about the connection with such high-ranking persons. Even Mandy's friend only knew the correct version of Kristin's adventures. Intelligence agencies all over the world were wondering, who is this girl and who does she really work for? Was she a double spy, and how does it relate to the Soviets? And Christine Keeler at that moment was nonchalantly sipping champagne and accepting another trinket from Ivanov as a gift. The idyll ended abruptly, with a series of shots from a revolver. What did you want? British spies. While still working as a dancer in Soho, Johnny Ejek, a drug dealer and thief, followed Christine Keeler. Officially, he was engaged in the promotion of jazz bands, but in fact he owned a brothel and, according to Western media, sometimes even acted as a pimp. A dark-skinned native of the West Indies fell in love with Kristin and tried to get her attention. She reciprocated for a while and even allocated him an apartment in Sheffield. Sometimes Keeler used this hot-tempered merchant to deal with other annoying suitors. It seems that the spy did not expect such a violent reaction and hastened to terminate all relations with the personal bodyguard. When he asked her for help and money for a lawyer, Kristin slammed the door in front of him. On December 14, 1962, he took his revolver and went to Stephen Ward's apartment. Kristin didn't tell many people where she really lived, but Johnny was able to find out this information. He knocked on the door, shouted, and demanded that the girl let him in. When she ordered him to get out, he started shooting. Of course, passers-by and neighbors heard the shots. Of course, they called the police. Then everything happened rapidly. Law enforcement agencies flooded Ward's house and during even the most superficial first interrogation learned facts that could put the whole government on its ears. Confused or made such a look, Keeler babbled everything in a row about her secret life, about working as a dancer, and about a drug den. At some point, the surnames of Profumo and Ivanov surfaced. Without wasting time, the police took the girl to the station. With Christine Keeler, who entered the house of the Soviet attaché Yevgeny Ivanov, John Profumo denied everything. Later, this moment will be called a catastrophic mistake, which crossed out all the merits of the Minister of War to the motherland. If he had honestly admitted a sexual relationship with a girl, perhaps he would have been mistaken for an ordinary ladies' man. But he tried to hide his unpresentable relationship, as a result of which they began to cause even more questions. The press daily supplied 3 or 4 diatribes, in which more and more details of John and Kristin's affair surfaced. Society was indignant and called Profumo to account, and in the end he confessed there was a connection. As a result, the reputation of the Conservative Party was seriously damaged. Pundits who defend traditional values and preach strict morality have almost been caught betraying the motherland. Needless to say, in 1963, Prime Minister Harold Macmillan resigned, and a year later his opponent's Labour won a resounding victory in the elections. However, John Profumo managed to avoid imprisonment. The fact of espionage was not proven, and only public censure fell to his lot. Valerie Hobson supported her husband throughout the trial and lived with him until her death. But Yevgeny Ivanov failed to save his marriage. Immediately after his emergency return to the USSR, he divorced his wife, at her request. She could not forgive him for his infidelity, and since then the naval captain has lived alone and quite poor. He met Christine Keeler again in 1993. She came to Moscow with journalists from the Daily Express newspaper. He got fatter, turned gray, and was no longer the big mighty bear that was lying in my bed, Keeler shared after the date. In 2009, Ivanov's memoirs were published under the title Naked Spy. The only one who finally felt the power of the law was KRISTIN Keeler. She had to serve 6 months in prison for perjury and obstruction of justice. Probably she could have avoided this punishment, but she dropped the phrase that Profumo once handed her money after a date and then denied it. The fact that she became pregnant as a result of this relationship and had an abortion, the girl kept silent. Many years later, she will explain that she did it for the sake of Profumo. She did not want to spoil the already trampled reputation of the minister. Then, in the 1960s, Christine Keeler became the anti-hero of the generation. Due to the constant attacks of the press and harassment, she was forced to change her last name to Sloan. She married twice, but these unions did not bring her happiness and quickly disintegrated. In her book of memoirs, she wrote, "It's true, in my youth I had sex for money, but only out of desperation. Ironically, it was sex for love that always caused me much more difficulties." On December 4, 2017, Christine Keeler died due to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. She was 75 years old.